All right, well, everyone, we would like to welcome you here. Thank you. If I could please have everyone's attention, thank you. Thank you. We're excited. Everybody's enjoying their conversations and having a good experience today. We're very excited to have everyone here with us today, and we were probably not as optimistic as we should have been about filling the room, or we would have gotten maybe a little larger room. We're a little packed in here, but we're grateful for the response and the support that many of you have given us today as we've prepared for this, and so we're excited. So on behalf of the board of Solutions Utah, my name is Lynn Ames. I'm chair of the board, and we all as a group want to welcome each of you here and thank you for being here and supporting us in our 2026 annual conference. Once again, this year we've tried to bring in some very important both local and national voices that will share some important information and insights as we continue to try to advance the efforts of helping many of our neighbors and friends that are struggling and find better and improving solutions for them as we move forward into the future. I also want to take a moment to express deep appreciation to our many sponsors that have supported us today and been very generous in their sponsorships and buying tables and other things. So thank you very much, and I invite you to look at your programs. We've listed all of our sponsors there that have supported us, and hope that you will recognize them and thank them as you have an opportunity to do so. Thank you. So as many of you know, Solutions Utah is an advocacy group addressing a variety of issues impacting the people of Utah. One of our areas of focus is addressing issues related to homelessness, which will be our focus today. We feel a deep sense of compassion for those currently experiencing homelessness, and especially for those that are chronically homeless and left to live on the streets. We desire to help and advance solutions that will allow many of these people to transform their lives and return to being productive citizens in our communities. We are also concerned about the residents in many neighborhoods and the local businesses in those neighborhoods that are negatively impacted by many who are living on the street as well. We promote ideas that focus on accountability and outcomes. We celebrate organizations that we were able to visit yesterday, including Switch Point and the Other Side Academy, the Other Side Village, and the shelters that help in these areas and have proven models to show how we can take people that once seemed to be forgotten and on the streets to becoming vibrant, productive members of our society once again and achieving the dignity that they surely deserve. We endorse a people-first model, and we'll celebrate that a little bit today, that includes housing, mental health, and addiction services, and preparing people to re-enter society in a state of being drug-free, crime-free, housed, and employed. We express appreciation to all in various organizations, many who are represented here today, who help in any way to address these issues for our neighbors and friends who are struggling with these challenges. Solutions Utah would also like to express appreciation to our state legislators who not too long ago finished a very busy legislative season on the Hill and passed some important bills that will help have policies in place and funding in place to help all of us to work together to achieve the outcomes that we desire. We would specifically like to recognize the following legislators. Stuart Adams is President of the Senate, Mike Schultz, Speaker of the House, former Representative Tyler Clancy, we'll hear more from him today, Representative Clint Okerlund, Representative Karen Lisenby, Senator Jerry Stevenson, and Senator Wayne Harper, all who've contributed in passing bills that we think will be helpful for the citizens of Utah and in our great city of Salt Lake. So if you could join us in giving them a round of applause, we'd appreciate that too. I would like to take a moment and express appreciation to a couple of people on our board. Is Jan in the room? There she is. She's in the back of the room. Jan Hemming has done a great job of trying to herd cats and get everybody in the right place, in the right seat. So we appreciate the many hours she's put in over the last week to figure out how to get us all in here and make it work. She's been tireless in her efforts. So I'd also like to express appreciation to Scott Howell, who's one of our board members, and probably 90% of us are here because of Scott Howell, in one way or another. And so thank you, Scott. Many of our board members would also like to recognize Chris Coombs. He's walking in the back. He's the chair of this program this year. We're grateful to his efforts, and he's had great experience in the governor's office. So, Chris, thank you. And I'd like to thank the remainder of our board, all of who have contributed to make this a very successful event. And we're, again, very excited to hear from the powerful speakers that we have today and give out a few very important awards. So without further ado, I'm going to get off the stand and turn the pulpit over to Tyler Clancy, who's our MC today, a former representative in the House and now currently the director of the Office of Homeless Services and chief counsel in this area to the governor. So we're delighted to have Tyler in that role and delighted to have him as our MC today in the program. So please welcome Tyler Clancy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll be brief. I'm going to keep it to about an hour, if that's okay with you. I just want you to take a moment and look around at your table, at the tables next to you, and recognize the power that's in this room. The power of people coming together to work on an issue that strikes at the heart of all of us. I think that's something that we can't let go of. As we walk out of the room today, we recognize that the problems that we're facing as a society, that the folks in our life, these different challenges, it can be heavy. It can be a lot to carry. But I hope as you look around, you realize you don't have to solve all the world's problems on your own. The organization, if your table is sitting at based on an organization, your organization doesn't have to solve the world's problems. We can work together. And I think that that's really what brings us here today. So I first want to just give a brief shout out. I know we gave our claps to our elected officials, but really quick, if you are a service provider in the shelter space, housing, mental health, substance abuse, would you raise your hand and just, let's give them a round of applause. These are the folks who get up every single day, early morning, late night, and yes, some of that's because I'm texting you late at night and early in the morning, but they're taking on the world's toughest challenges. We call this challenge, we call it homelessness, but we're describing so many different issues all at once. We're talking about a mom who's working at a fast food restaurant, working 40 hours a week, doing everything she can, working her hardest, playing by all the rules, and she still can't get ahead. And so she's staying at a hotel or a motel or couch surfing. That's homelessness. We're also talking about folks who are dealing with mental health challenges. How many of you, just by a show of hands, have heard of the phrase agnoxinosia? A couple. So let's just demonstrate what this really is. I'm gonna use a volunteer here, Derek Brown, our Attorney General, right here. So thank you for volunteering. So Derek, are you married? I am. Married, okay. And what's your wife's name? Emily. How long have you been married to Emily? 30. We'll move on. Yeah, that's 32 years. You've been married 32 years with Emily. What if I told you today, when you got here today, I said, A.G. Brown, you're not married to Emily. A.G. Brown, you need to stop contacting her because she has a protective order against you. You're trespass. You have to stop. You're going to go to jail. Would you believe me? No, you wouldn't believe me. We have individuals who are on our streets who are experiencing that type of mental illness. It's not a choice. It's not we're asking them to just choose to get better. These are folks who have deteriorated mentally, and so they don't recognize that they're sick. For many of us, if we were experiencing a hardship when it came to mental health, we would know it's time to pick up the phone and ask for help. But for a small portion of our individuals, our friends and neighbors who are living on the streets, they don't recognize that. And that's a unique issue. We're also talking about folks who are younger than me, who are in the thick of drug addiction, particularly to methamphetamine and fentanyl. Fentanyl has claimed hundreds of Utahns' lives every single year since at least 2020, to the tune of about 600 to 800 people a year. And that's really what I think we need to drive home. You're going to hear about data today. You're going to hear about graphs, charts, percentages. But I want you to think about that number of the folks who we've lost. And I've been there. I've been in the hotel room where I'm sitting there with someone who's passed away from a fatal overdose, younger than me. And I'll tell you what breaks your heart the most is when you're sitting in that moment and you see their phone start to buzz. And it's a text, and it says, from Dad, hey, buddy, we're praying for you. Hang in there. You can get through this. You see a text from Mom come through, or a call, a couple missed calls, and it's a text from Mom, and it says, please come home. We'll figure this out. And you know that you're going to have to go make that notification. So when we talk about numbers, when we talk about charts, when we talk about data, when we say the word homelessness, we're talking about human beings. And so I appreciate Solutions Utah talking about this people-first approach, because every single family that we lose to whether it's death, whether it's intergenerational poverty, that's a son who's never going to get to grow up playing catch with his dad. It's a mom who's always going to have an empty seat at her dinner table. I don't know if we can quantify the impacts to our society. I don't know if we can quantify the impact of that loss to a state. And so I'll end where I began, which is that when you think about the scope of this issue, it can be overwhelming. It can be almost too much to carry sometimes when you think about the people that make up these stories. When we think about the people who aren't here today, who are either out on the streets, who we've lost, or maybe some of you don't know where your loved ones are, and you hope and pray that they come home someday. But at the end of the day, it's a human issue, and we can never lose sight of that. I'll close by just sharing something that means a lot to me and I think would mean a lot to you. I was reading a book a couple years ago, and it was a journal from the Freedom Riders. And they were folks who were registering people to vote in the Jim Crow South, and they were dealing with a number of different challenges. And one of the workers, she wrote something interesting in her journal, and I wrote it down in mine, and I think it would mean a lot to you today. She said, sometimes I ask God, and I get on my knees, and I ask God why he allows poverty, why he allows hunger, why he allows such pain in the world. And then right about the time I'm going to get up off of my knees, I realize God could ask me the same thing. So today you're going to hear stories of inspiration. You're going to hear about what our federal government's doing. You're going to hear about what our state partners are doing. I hope you take the time to those folks who raise their hand, the service providers, listen to their stories and what they're working on. And you'll be inspired to do just that. I finally want to close because I know this room is special. This room is not like others about I've been in 1,000 of these public policy discussions and political dinners. I also want to have someone else raise their hand if you feel so inclined to do so. If you have lived experience in homelessness or mental health or substance abuse, and you feel comfortable to share your hand, to raise your hand, and to be recognized today, will you please do so? Let's give them a round of applause. We have expertise here in the room. I want you to see the people who raise their hand, talk to them, learn their stories. And that, I believe, we shouldn't just move on and say, oh, that was a great story. Anyway, what should we do to solve the crisis? We need to learn from their stories, learn from the healing, and learn from the hope. Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for being in the fight with us to take on these quintessentially human issues. And I'm excited for a great program that you're going to enjoy. Thank you. So it's my pleasure. I'm going to invite Chief Brian Redd of Salt Lake City Police Department to come to the stage while you're eating. And then following that, we'll hear from our Attorney General for the state of Utah, Derek Brown.
It's tough to be sandwiched in between a former politician and a current politician, but I'll do my best. You know, the thought that came to me when I stepped into the room today, and there's so many friends and colleagues that I've worked with over the years, but it feels like the cavalry is coming for the Salt Lake City Police Department. Our police officers have been on the streets working hard for several years, and it just feels like we're in a time where it's all coming together, where we can, one, create a safer Salt Lake City, and number two, help these individuals who have been on our streets struggling. And the plan is coming together. I feel really great about it. If we could switch the slide. We did a mission, vision, values rebranding the Salt Lake City Police Department last year. And we brought our people in, our officers, our professional staff, and we asked them, why do you do this work? What are our values? You know, what are we about as a police department? And we formed a new mission. It's in the top of the shield. But what I want to key on, and then our values are in the middle of the shield, which are the most important because that's how we do our work every day. We tell our officers, go out and do your work. Enforce the law. If you need to enforce the law, you have discretion, but enforce the law. But if you do, the way you enforce the law matters. The way you treat people matters while you're out there. There's the people with needs. So make sure you approach it appropriately with the respect and empathy we have in our values. But I want to focus on the vision statement, working together to build a community where everyone is safe, supported, and accountable. And I think that's what we're all about. We want safety in our community. We want the feeling of safety. We want to be safe. We want to support individuals who are struggling on our streets. And we want to have accountability. Accountability for those individuals on the streets, but also accountability for all of us in this room. For the government entities that are working on this problem, for the service providers, for the business community. We all come together. We're accountable to solve this problem together. So I wanted to just highlight our vision statement because this room embodies what we're trying to do, I think, today in our vision. Next slide. And these are the pillars: our people, our community, and our future. And when we talk about our future, we talk about organizational improvement. We talk about building future leaders, and we talk about using technology and innovation. And so doing things the way we've always done it, we don't like that statement in the Salt Lake City Police Department. We want to look at better and new ways of doing things, and we innovate. If something doesn't work, we just stop doing that and we try something new, and that's good innovation. Next slide. Last year, let me tell a story before I get started. So last year, we started creating these heat maps. These are homeless-related calls for service. And we started looking at where the hot spots across the city were. And number one was the Jordan River. When I got here 2 weeks in, you know, we went over there with Commander Clapp. I don't know if he's here today. We looked at that. This is where kids go to school. There's homes and residences, residential areas. And I called the mayor and I said, we need to close the river trail. We need to get a handle on this. This isn't all homelessness. There's some crime there. A few weeks later, I was in that area and I met a woman and she had her backpack stolen. And she came to us and said, can you take a report? She was an obvious drug user. And so I asked her, I said, tell me your story. What are you doing down here? And she said, well, I just got out of jail. I had a domestic violence incident with my boyfriend. I ended up in jail. I'm out of jail and I'm down here and I'm looking for drugs. And that's what she told me. And I said, well, hey, there's a better way. Let's take you down to the VOA and get you into detox. We can help you. You're better than this. And, you know, she looked at me and she said, no, I want to do drugs. And by the way, every city has a Skid Row. Just give us our Skid Row here. And I told her, I said, well, respectfully, we're not going to have a Skid Row in Salt Lake City. And so pass the word around. We're not going to have open-air drug markets in Salt Lake City anymore because there's too much victimization that goes on around these centers of encampments, and we can't have it because it becomes a vortex. You know, for years I've worked on the streets, especially a few years ago down in Salt Lake City, and I can't tell you how many parents came rolling in their cars asking for their child, like to find my child, showing me a picture of their child, and please do something, help them. And so we're not going to have open-air drug markets in Salt Lake City. We are going to connect people to services, and we are going to work hard together as a team in here to help the people that are on the streets that need the help. This heat map, I just wanted to show, this is on the left, the heat map shows about 677 calls in a 1-week period last May. And in this May, homeless-related calls for service are down to, I think it was 377, just under 400. So we're making progress. Now, anywhere I go, I remind people, the only way the heat map is built is by people calling and reporting issues. So please call in and let us know where the challenges are, and we will send our social workers, we'll send our officers, we'll work with our partners to try to resolve these issues. But we are, I think, making progress in the city, and now we just need to make sure we're being effective for the individuals that are struggling. Next slide. You've all heard of Project Connect, and many of you in here are involved in Project Connect. We started this with the mayor's office from her public safety plan that she put together just prior to my arrival at Salt Lake City. Project Connect it takes social workers from the Salt Lake City Police Department. We work with the Salt Lake City Justice Court. We work with the DA's office. We work with the legal defenders. And I'm going to miss other partners, and I apologize. But there's a lot of us in the room. And we took the 50 top individuals in Salt Lake City that we were arresting. Some of them had 27 arrests in a year, 85 warrants outstanding. We took the top 50 and we said, we're going to invest in these individuals. Yes, we're going to hold them accountable, but we need to invest in them, and we need to case manage and wrap around. And these are some of the results that we're seeing. At any time, about half of the 50 are in jail, in and out of jail over the last year. But we're seeing a 32% reduction overall in arrests of these individuals as we invest in them. We see a 39% reduction in just interactions, maybe a call for a person down, and it's one of our Connect people that are down, and we show up. We don't make an arrest, but we show up, medical shows up. We're seeing a 39% decrease. And of the 50 individuals, 84% of them over the past year have been arrested less. And so there's some amazing stories that we have. We've put them into the Switch Point micro shelters. We've worked with them. We've worked with the Road Home on priority and Catholic Community Services at the Wiegand Center for priority bed space for these individuals. So we're making really good progress working with our partners. So we're very excited about Project Connect. We're going to be expanding that with the help of and support of Tyler Clancy and the Department of Corrections, who is increasing some capacity, and we're going to continue to expand on Project Connect, which has been very successful, and we're excited about it. Next slide. We have 3 or 4 different policing strategies in Salt Lake City, and this year we added a new policing strategy called Focused Deterrence, and we created a targeted offender partnership with the District Attorney's Office, who dedicated 2 full-time attorneys, and the Department of Corrections, who has provided some adult probation and parole agents. And we've identified the most prolific felony offenders in Salt Lake City, 114 of them. And we've actually sent letters to those individuals, and we've told them, we are not going to tolerate any more criminal activity from you. You're on our list. And we sent them letters, and our teams are going out and contacting these individuals right now. We've partnered with the Other Side Academy because we're creating an off-ramp even for these individuals. We're telling these individuals, you're not going to offend anymore in our city, and if you do, you're going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent. But we have an off-ramp for you, and this is the off-ramp, and we will get you resources and help. So helping our Connect population, which is a misdemeanor population, typically mental illness, substance use, low-level criminogenic behaviors, homeless, that's Project Connect. TOPS is for our prolific offenders, our felony offenders, but either way, we're showing that we're going to deliver results for these individuals if they don't take the off-ramp, or we're going to provide the services in need and help the Connect population. Not incarceration for them, but a higher level of accountability, but support for these individuals. Next slide. And It's hard for me to see these statistics, so I'm going to do my best. I just want to highlight a couple of these. This is year-to-date data, so this is year-to-date January to now compared to 2025 last year at this time. We've seen this is really exciting for Salt Lake City Police Department. We've seen a 10% reduction in calls for service this year compared to last year. So what that means is that frees up time for our police officers to be more proactive in the community, to do more community engagement, to engage with the youth of our community. We have some issues around traffic in the city that we need to work on, so that will free up time to do that. So that's a good statistic that we see calls for service going down, as long as people are calling when there is a crime, which I'm going to, again, reiterate. Please call if there's a crime or a problem. If you go down the on views, so the third line down, it shows a 19% increase. This is proactive work by the Salt Lake City police officers. So this is something that they generate from a traffic stop or a street contact or whatever. So we're seeing calls for service go down, officer proactivity go up. The results, violent crime is down 8.3% overall this year. We have a couple hot spots. Aggravated assault within families is up in the red this year, and rape is up in the red. We believe the rape reporting is up. We've been booking more people into jail recently, and we're getting a lot of reporting at the jail where maybe people are safe to feel like they can report that they have been raped. So we're working closely with the district attorney's office in those areas, but overall, violent crime is down 8%. Property crime is down 22% this year as well. So property crime is at large is down in across the city. So those are really great. We are enforcing the camping ordinance, and we're going to continue to do so. We're enforcing panhandling and park curfews, and that enforcement is all up significantly. But these are also opportunities for us to connect with individuals and offer services while we're enforcing those camping laws. Jail bookings are down this year 5%, and what that potentially tells me is, well, there's a policing. It's not a theory. There's evidence to show that the likelihood of getting caught is a stronger deterrent to crime than the level of punishment. So as our officers are being more proactive in the community, being more visible, we're seeing less crime being committed in the first place, and we're seeing jail bookings going down, which is a good thing, as long as the crime rates are going down, which they are. So do you want to go to the next slide? That's all I have. Again, I just want to thank all of you for the support you offer the Salt Lake City Police Department. I want to give a public acknowledgement to the work of our Salt Lake City police officers, and if we could give them a hand, please. They've been on the front lines of this crisis for a long time, and we feel like the cavalry's coming. So thank you for all you're doing to support us.
Thank you, Chief Red. Great work. I am part of what Lynn mentioned is the 90% that's here because of Scott Howell. And so I know a lot of you are as well. And actually, as a funny side note, Tyler and I actually do share one background thing in common. We were both young interns for Scott Howell. Now, he's still young. I'm not anymore. But after interning with Scott, and here's a little bit of irony, he helped me get my second internship after that position, interning for him. And my internship was in the Office of the Utah Attorney General. So just a little irony that 30 years later, we are here. But anyway, I appreciate the great work that's being done. And honestly, a lot of what we do here in Utah is connect dots. I feel like one of the biggest problems that we've had, and one of the biggest problems I think just generally in law enforcement, and we see this everywhere. This isn't just homelessness. I mean, in my office, the legislature just authorized $1.7 million for a financial crimes fusion center, which we're using basically
to identify crimes in different jurisdictions and then be able to connect the dots. And it's the same thing with the kinds of homeless issues that we work on. And two things I appreciate. One is the level of collaboration within those elected officials. And I mean, the reality is I work, as you probably assume or imagine, I work pretty regularly with other attorneys general around the country. We know each other on a first name basis. We work on every kind of issue you can imagine. And I know that the press sometimes throws out the more politicized type issues, but when it comes to protecting kids, when it comes to protecting people, when it comes to deterring crime, as a group of attorneys general, this is an absolutely bipartisan issue. We all get along. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've literally been on phone calls with everyone from the head of our bipartisan organization in Connecticut to Letitia James in New York. It doesn't matter, because ultimately we want to protect people. We want to protect our streets. It is, in fact, a bipartisan issue. And the other thing that we've got here in Utah, two other things. First of all, I appreciate our partners in the federal government. I appreciate those of you who are here. Thank you for coming out to Utah. I literally was there yesterday meeting with officials specifically on issues involving Utah. But not only do we work together as elected officials, I appreciate the fact that the private sector, the service provider sector, all are working here. We have individuals like Randy Shumway and the Prices and others who are all part of this network, all working together. One of the other things I do, and you may not know this, but we spend a lot of time in my office defending bills that are passed by the legislature. So we actually, in my office, we spend a lot of time working with the legislature. I've spent, I don't know how many calls that my team has had with Tyler during the years. I could not even begin to identify how many of these calls. But the reality is, we work together. We try to connect the dots. We try to think ahead. And then sometimes you have these bills that get passed, and we know full well we're going to get sued. And my job is to defend those bills. And one of the things we worry about a lot is just addictions generally. As you know, the correlation between addictions and homelessness and addictions and, obviously drug use are sky high. And even things that you may not think about. The legislature outlawed vaping or flavored vapes. Because as you know, our kids were getting these, and they're getting these online. They're getting these through social media apps. And my job was to defend that law when it got challenged in court. We were successful, so that law is still the law here in Utah. And in fact, we had the legislature this last session was seeing a lot of problems with addictions with what we call gas station heroin, and kids who were using what's called Kratom. A lot of you may have heard of Kratom, and specifically substances and brands like Feel Free, which would use synthetic substances that they would combine with Kratom. And last year we saw 100 Kratom-related deaths here in Utah. And so the legislature passed a law outlawing everything but the most pure form of Kratom. It was challenged, and just a couple weeks ago, my office successfully defended that law. So that law still stands here in Utah. And so ultimately, what I want is a couple of things. We're going to continue to connect the dots, work with the different agencies, and I'm going to be rabid when it comes to our kids and addictions, because when you're 15 years old, your prefrontal cortex is not developed. And so much of what my office has done through the years has been identifying things that have caused addictions. And when you think about it, through the years, we've dealt with tobacco, we've dealt with opioids. Today I mentioned vaping and Kratom. There are addictions, as you know, with social media. We're seeing the prediction market issue. The number of kids out there who are addicted to or are in constant communication with a chat bot is off the charts. Now, it's one thing if an adult makes a decision. It's another thing if someone whose brain is not fully developed makes that addiction, because my goal is to promote human flourishment, and that requires freedom. And if someone is addicted, they're not truly free. It's like the woman that Chief Red just talked about when he said, "You're better than this." And her response was, "No, this is what I want to do." It's not that she really wanted to do that. It's that she was addicted. And the freedom, in effect, was taken away from her through that. So anyway, let me just say I appreciate those who have been working in this issue. I appreciate so many of the leaders, and I appreciate the work that Tyler's doing. I like having these kind of leaders because true leaders, as they say, are those who don't look at the waves when they manage and navigate a ship. They look at the horizon. And our job is to look at this issue, but not just today and not just from now till next year, but truly look at our kids, look 20 years out. That's what we need to do to see where the waves are coming. So anyway, with that, it's an honor to serve as the Attorney General of Utah, and I appreciate so many people in this room who are doing so much work to help on these issues. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to invite Jeff Olson and Lynn Ames to come up to the stage. They'll be presenting our awards. I also, while they're making their way up, you have a notepad at your table. We're going to have the opportunity to do some Q&A for our speakers today. So write down some questions. We'll pick those up in a little bit. And I also want to recognize Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ronnie Kurtz, is here today. Let's give a hand to Assistant Secretary Kurtz. He's joined by Aram Shah, who's also a senior policy advisor as well. And we are honored to have them. Thank you. We're honored to have them with us today. All right, Mr. Olson, come on up.
Thank you all. It's great to be with you here today, especially have the opportunity to make this award. First of all, we have the privilege, this is the Garbett Award, and we have the privilege of having them with us today. They are longtime, out-of-the-spot Utahns. They're two of the founders of the Garbett Family Foundation, which supported Pioneer Park Coalition, which Bryson started. The Pioneer Park Coalition is now Solutions Utah. We're honored to have them here to present the award that bears their name. The Garbett Award is an annual honor presented by Solutions Utah to recognize individuals for quiet, out-of-the-spotlight service within the homeless industry. It highlights selfless, behind-the-scenes work aimed at improving the lives of those experiencing homelessness and affected communities. I'm now going to turn the time over to the Garbetts to make this award.
John Douglas Clapp has served for decades as a counselor at Odyssey House.
You can see in your program a little bit about him, and I'm just going to refresh your minds if you haven't had a chance to, if you've read that he is a longtime resident in Salt Lake, the North Temple area, and he helped organize and maintain the original Community Watch group, if maybe it's the only Community Watch group, but in 2020, he helped found the North Temple Community Improvement Alliance. I wanted to get that name right. As the chief was talking about, we're all accountable, and he has put that into practice for years. He has been accountable, and he has been serviceable and giving support and help.
Alliance participants meet bi-weekly with representatives of various city agencies to address crime, drug use, and nuisances that contribute to negative perceptions of the neighborhood. They organize community cleanups and work with adjacent organizations to expand their positive reach. In the early days, John even confronted drug dealers. We're glad he is alive here to receive this award. And their efforts helped to close the Gateway Inn and make Madsen Park, the Jordan River Parkway, and other areas near North Temple safe and pleasant again.
The transformation has been dramatic. Prior to this, one resident reported 50 people congregating in the park strip just by his home and in an adjacent median. And he said often there would be physical violence breaking out, that they would have to contact police daily for this. The following morning, they'd be cleaning up needles and waste. And since that time, they've hardly had any incidences since you have been around.
There's still more to do, but thanks to John and the Alliance and strong city support, progress is being made.
Thank you, John, for your wonderful and important work.
Thank you so much. This is for you. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Before we present the next award, I forgot to recognize Suzanne Mateson and her team, Christina and others that have hosted us here at the Grand America today. We're very grateful for their generosity and willingness to service this great meal. So a round of applause for Grand America and their team, and Suzanne. All right. I need Jan Hemming to come join me up here, wherever she went. Is she here? There she is. Okay. All right. Well, on behalf of the Board of Solutions Utah, I am delighted to announce the recipient of the 2026 Solutions Utah Leadership Award. This award recognizes courageous people in our community that proactively lead out on providing innovative solutions to some of society's most challenging issues, such as addressing homelessness. They are entrepreneurs that bring extraordinary effort, sacrifice, and thought leadership to help the lives of many, to help themselves. This year's recipient is one of those powerful leaders that have created an organization that has blessed the lives of so many that have suffered so much and have been often left behind. She has lifted them, helped them gain hope and dignity, and provide them a positive path forward in life. I recently heard a church leader say, "Every person is a divine being." That struck me, and as I had the opportunity to prepare to give this award, thinking about the life of our recipient, she lives this theme in her personal life, in the way that she goes about her work. We're pleased to recognize as this year's recipient, Carol Hollowell. We'll invite her up in a minute. I wanted to say a little bit more about Carol. Carol never set out to have a career dealing with homelessness. Her path began in 2013 in a moment of compassion and inspiration, which Carol refers to as a switch point moment in her life, and turned out to be a switch point in the lives of many others after her. She was led to meet a homeless man named Ray. He was in a wheelchair going down the street. Carol stopped, asked Ray where he was going. He was off to get a cup of coffee. Jan, in her kindness, loaded he and his wheelchair in her truck and drove him to get a cup of coffee. There she learned that Ray had been homeless for many years because someone had stolen his wallet and he'd lost his ID and he didn't know how to get that back again. After many hours of kind service, a lot of patience at the DMV, and a rough day, by the end of that day, Ray had his ID and a roof over his head. Not long after that, in 2014, Carol opened her first homeless facility in St. George, Utah. And that launched her on a crusade to bless the lives of so many other Rays that are out there. She has since, with her organization, I believe, has 13, is that correct? 13 facilities around the state of Utah. They literally serve thousands, have served thousands of people for many, many years, as we have highlighted. The thing I've noticed that's impressive to me about Carol's approach is, much like her experience with Ray, Carol connects with individual people, listens to who they are, what their story is, and understands what their needs are and the barriers preventing them to get to a better place. And then, with that understanding, she moves into action and creates opportunities to eliminate barriers and help people gain dignity and hope for the future. Her organization champions the value and quality of work, which contributes so much to helping these people regain confidence in themselves, the dignity that they deserve, and puts them on a path forward to become self-sufficient, happy, and vibrant in our community. We're grateful for those. There have been thousands of them that have now been blessed individually, one by one, as divine beings in the loving care of Carol Hollowell and her wonderful team and organization. Please join me in welcoming Carol Hollowell and congratulating her on receiving this wonderful award.
What an inspiring presentation. Thank you both. We'll now have a brief video presentation, following which we will introduce our keynote speakers. Destiny, will you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. I think I speak for all of us when I say that you make us proud to be Utahns. Thank you, Destiny. I now have the pleasure of introducing Miss Gloria Gong, one of our special guests for today. Ms. Gong is the Executive Director of the Performance Lab at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. During her 12-year tenure, the lab has completed over 200 projects in 89 jurisdictions, advising governments on more than $6 billion in results-driven contacting. And I don't want to give you too much of an insight into what she's going to share, but let's suffice it to say she's had to spend the last 2 days with me, and I'll say, I think, and she goes, the data actually shows this. So without any further ado, can we give a warm welcome to Ms. Gloria Gong?
Thanks so much, Tyler, and thank you to all of you. I'm so grateful and excited to be here. In addition to traveling to Utah my whole life to visit family, I also went to undergrad here, and I would wake up every morning and walk out of my dorm and look at the mountains and just feel this incredible feeling of privilege to be somewhere that I think is truly one of the most beautiful places in the world. And so as an undergrad student, I made a promise to myself where I said, I don't ever want to take this for granted. I want every time I walk out and see the mountains to have that feeling. And so when I flew back into town at Tyler and Scott's invitation to speak here, I landed and I looked up and I was like, wow, Utah, still got it. Chills. This is such a special place, and it's really special to me. So after going to undergrad here, I lived abroad, I went to law school, and I became really interested in the question of how government worked. I was really interested not in what the side coaches on the sidelines thought government should be doing, all those people who are like, do better, but what the people who are actually out doing the work needed in order to do their jobs effectively. And I started looking around at people who were interested in like the inner workings of government, and I couldn't find that many people who were interested in like the boring back office stuff around how does government spend money? How do we get procurements out? How do we work with contractors? How do we organize all these complicated services and actually deliver things for our community? And so I kind of stumbled my way around and ended up at Harvard, where I started the Government Performance Lab, which I'm still leading today. And you heard Tyler talk about it. We work across the country on public safety, children and families, and homelessness and housing. And I will say we've worked from LA, which has an eighth of the nation's homelessness, to rural Pennsylvania, to North Carolina, to Chicago. We did a survey last year where we put out a call to cities to tell us about some of the challenges they were facing with their homelessness service systems, and we heard back from almost 200 cities sharing their challenges with us. So the types of things that you are talking about here, people across the country are working together to try to figure out. So I thought what I might do is just share some of the things that we're learning as we talk with folks across the country in case they're useful here. Although, spoiler, I think you're actually doing many of them already. So one of the things I think is really important when we're talking about the homelessness system is to actually recognize that this is a system that is dealing with two problems that are being fed into the same system. And one of them is economically driven homelessness. Folks who are homeless because they can't afford to pay for their home. We actually tend to not talk about these folks as much because they are not visible in the same way. They still go to their jobs, their kids go to schools, but they end up couch surfing for a little while and then bouncing back and forth between places and maybe sleeping in a car as they kind of do that slide through housing precarity. And this is very, very directly related to how much housing costs. And so if you zoom back and look at the data for the past decade and a half, and really since 2008 and the crisis that destroyed our construction industry and that we never really rebounded from, and we kind of plateaued on our building houses, what you will see is just basic market economics. We don't have enough supply of something, demand is going up, prices are going up, and that means people keep getting pushed closer and closer to the edge of what they can afford. My colleagues at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard put out their 2006 report this year, and it's really jarring. They said half of renters are housing burdened, and 25% of renters are spending 50% or more of their income on housing. And you all probably know someone in your lives who's in that group. They're holding on, but they're right on the edge. And when you have enough people who are right on the edge, something little has to happen, and they get pushed out. They throw their back out at their construction site. They have a medical emergency, and the deductible is more than they thought it was going to be. They have a kid whose healthcare has extra costs, and all of a sudden you're a month late and another month late, and you're starting to pull on friends and family, and eventually you end up in the support system that's the homelessness system. And so one thing I want to do before we transition to talking about the other set of problems that we're dealing with as homeless is just recognize that you have a system here that is helping thousands of people every year who are in that category get rehoused every year. And again, this is the kind of invisible part of the system we don't talk about, but I just want to acknowledge your providers in the room and say they are kind of quietly and without a lot of visible fanfare just helping thousands of people come through, be caught in that safety net, get that temporary support, and then be rehoused. I think Tyler told me that here in your state, it's about 75% of the folks who go through your homelessness system resolved within a year. They're coming in, they're getting that support, and then they're back out on their feet. The other thing I'll say about this problem, though, is the more we see that disconnect between what people can afford and how much housing costs, the more strain we're putting on this part of the system. And because you've been so successful in attracting people from across the country who want to live here, those rising housing prices are really going to put pressure on this part of your housing system. And so the main thing I want to say here is this part of the problem is not actually complicated, it's just really hard. The way to solve this is to have a lot more housing. That's going to bring the cost of housing down. But you all know there are a lot of tough reasons why that's hard to do, but the more housing you have, the less housing will cost, the fewer people will need that extra support. But the more housing costs, the more you're going to see year after year people who fall out into the homelessness system and can't make their way back into the market rate housing system because it's out of their reach. And what was supposed to be a temporary catchment starts being more and more like a permanent place for people to land. Okay, that's part of the equation. That's actually a huge percentage of the people who are coming through the homelessness system. There's this other percentage here, I think Tyler was saying it's about 25%. That's really similar in a lot of other jurisdictions where these are folks, so I think of those economically vulnerable folks as people who, if housing was cheap enough, they could stay housed. The thing that's a barrier for them is finding housing that's affordable. For this other group of folks, it's not just a question of housing. We could give them a completely free unit of housing, and if they don't have some extra support, they can't stay housed. And that's because they have some combination of substance use, mental health, disabilities, other barriers that are more deep than just not being able to pay for their housing. This is actually a kind of small group in the bigger scheme, but they're very visible to us because we see them outside, and it's so scary for us to see people who are experiencing severe mental illness or substance use. To us, this really becomes the face of homelessness. So one thing I just want to point out to everyone is, like, if you're really trying to prevent homelessness, you'd put a lot of your energy into actually building more housing so you have affordable housing that everyone could live in. And I know that you are working on that a lot, and I've read about the work your governor is doing on that. Then on this other side of the scale, this is a complicated issue, and you heard the chief talking about it, because this is not just folks who don't have homes. This is something that's at the intersection of public safety and the medical system and public health and homelessness. And when that happens, you run into a classic government problem where you've got a bunch of silos, and every silo is doing their best to solve their little piece that they touch, and we're not doing the pass off, like the hands off across that we need to. So the way that I think about this when I talk to my team about this is that it's like we have a bunch of boxes, and in our boxes we have a piece of our car. This box has an engine. This box has a gas pedal. This box has the transmission. You could go and say, hey, look, I want to switch out and have a better engine. That might help, but that's not why it's not working. The problem is we have not connected the pieces together. And so I'm going to share 4 principles from our work that we've seen be really helpful in kind of building that car. And the first one is a focus on outcomes. So I'm going to take you with me for a second to Harvard. You guys can pretend you're an entry-level class. I'm going to teach you a really quick thing about inputs, outputs, and outcomes, because we talk about outcomes all the time, but I take this very seriously. Inputs are the thing that you put in. So in the car, it's the pieces of the car. You need all those pieces. You need the gas. You need the parts of the car to go together. Outputs are then what happens from that. Once you put the pieces together, well, the car can move. But outcomes are where you go with the car, the destination that you land up in. And so in homelessness, the inputs are the things like the funding that you set aside, the treatment beds that you have, the other things that you're putting in, the facilities that you've built, the people that you've hired. The outputs are whether people get those services. How many meals did you deliver? How many touch points did you have with your clients? How many counseling sessions? How many of these navigator meetings? But the outcomes are whether people got housed, and if they stayed in that housing, and if they didn't come back into your other emergency systems. And so that needs to be the goal that everything is focused around. And what we've seen is that when you can really clearly say what your outcomes are, you can reverse engineer the rest of the system that you need. The second principle that we really focus on is accountability. And I love how much you all are talking about that. I've heard a lot about kind of personal accountability here. I just want to say, as someone who both believes in and thinks and cares about government also needs to be accountable. When it's spending money from taxpayers, it needs to show that that money is being put toward things that work. But the third thing is that the accountability has to be connected to resourcing and to autonomy. So one problem that we see all the time is that we've split up the little pieces of the system so far apart from each other that, as one provider said to me, everyone's at the table so no one's accountable. And everyone has a little piece of the problem, but no one owns it top to bottom. And so there can't be accountability all the way through, and they also don't have the resources. And I personally think accountability for that resources is just blame. So if you want to hold someone accountable, for example, if you were going to say, I'm going to ask you to get people into treatment beds, you have to have those treatment beds. If you have enough resources for them, then you can ask them, you can hold them accountable for putting folks into those treatment beds. And then our last principle that we use is that you need to serve people, not systems. So serve people, not processes. Sometimes we get so connected to these processes that we just want to say, like, did we do it right? Did we do the checklist? Did we do the model? But I think exactly as you heard the chief describing, when you start looking at the specific people that you're serving, you find out that they need really individualized solutions. This person has needs substance use treatment. This person needs a place to stay where they can have an animal because they've been in and out of foster care and they don't have like a stable emotional support. This person needs help figuring out how to be able to communicate with their family. So you have to be able to take that individualized approach and serve people, not systems. Okay, so let me give you an example of what this sounds like. And I'm actually giving you an example from Detroit, not about homelessness, and then we'll do a homelessness example really quickly. But there's this super interesting project in Detroit that I think kind of shows these principles. The mayor there had several $1 million from some of the ARPA funds. They were supposed to be used for community violence intervention, so people who go into neighborhoods and stop people from shooting each other. And what he said to me is, he said, I looked around the country, I didn't see something that was so clearly gonna work that we should just bring it to Detroit and scale it citywide. And we see this all the time. He's like, we didn't know if it would work here. And so he said, what I decided to do instead was take this really humble but very outcomes-driven approach and say to our local providers, listen, you guys know these neighborhoods better. We're gonna trust you. We want you to try stuff out, experiment, innovate. But the way we're gonna do this is that we're gonna hold you accountable for just one thing. Do shootings go down? That is what we're gonna measure you on. So they did what I think is one of the most interesting government procurements that I've seen. They took millions of dollars, they put out a hot spot of the city that showed where the shootings were happening. And then they said to the providers, pick a zone. You can propose a zone to us. You're local, you know which blocks, which gangs, like who you have relationships with. You can propose a zone, you can pick your model. We're not gonna micromanage you. Like we don't know how to do your work, you pick your model, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure. And what we need to see is we need to see shootings dropping. And they can't just drop because actually at this time, shootings were dropping across the country. So they said they have to drop relative to the city baseline. So if the city's going down, you have to go down more than the whole city is. You have to beat it by 20%. If you beat it by 20%, we'll double your payment. So he gave them these really generous base payments so that they weren't taking on a ton of financial risk doing this work, but then he said you can double it if you can drop these shootings. And they picked 6 providers. And what the mayor said to me is, he said, we just wanted to try stuff. We picked 6 totally different providers. We picked a big legacy provider who had millions of dollars of services with the city. We picked tiny organizations that were just run by gang members who had gone out of jail and then recovered their lives and were trying to get back to their communities. He said, we don't know what works. We want to try different things. He said, we picked people who had been deep political opponents of mine, people who had gone around and ripped down yard signs and posted it on YouTube. And he's like, but they were very connected in their communities. And what they started seeing as they measured this, then they started having these quarterly meetings. The mayor would call them together, and the providers told me it was like having a sports coach, like a locker room thing where they'd all get around, they'd look at this dashboard together, and you would just look at your numbers. Were they going up or down? And what I saw was so interesting. The providers just kicked into super high gear. They started collaborating with the police. They asked the police to tell them the second a shooting happened so they could be on site immediately with the police. They didn't want an hour lag because they had to get to that kid's family to ensure there wasn't a retaliatory shooting. And then they just started testing all kinds of things. Could they pull the kids out of these situations? Could they go do basketball games? Could they mend relationships with the gangs? One of the providers told me, he's like, I had a really bad quarter and the mayor chewed me out, and I went home and I was like, I need younger staff. My staff is 25, they're too old to connect with these kids. So he's like, I fired a bunch of them and hired young kids. And he's like, and then we had our best results the next quarter after that. But my point is, it just allowed them to be creative and to test things. And so 2 of the most interesting things that I saw happening with that are one of the providers started doing very well every quarter. And this was a provider who had actually gone to Chicago, taken classes in evidence-based community violence intervention, and brought that back to Detroit. And what the mayor said to me is, he said, listen, we saw it in their proposal. It seemed really nerdy, but I thought it sounded cool. All of the policy experts liked it. But if I had told the other people in the city to do it, all of the other providers would have told us, get out of here. Don't tell us what to do. Don't tell us to copy what Aaliyah's doing. But when Aaliyah's group started being the one that every quarter was dropping shootings by 20% over the city baseline, 30, 40, 45%, the other providers started calling her and saying, Aaliyah, what are you doing? And so they started seeing those practices that work spread across the city without any forcing from the government, because the providers wanted so much to hit their outcomes. And the other thing they saw, and I want you to listen to this because this is a very rare story in government, is they saw 2 low-performing providers who just, I mean, it looked like they weren't even there. Their numbers just exactly tracked the cities. You didn't see them moving down at all. So they put them both on a kind of like improvement thing. One of them like really kicked it into gear, started moving up, and the other one never improved. And they ended that provider's contract. For those of you that don't work in government, you don't know how amazing that is, but it's a really special thing to have the money actually follow the outcomes. And what they did, and the thing that was the most interesting for me about this, is that that contractor was actually the big legacy provider in the system. They were the one who had millions of dollars of contracts and all these fancy grant writers, and they just had kind of floated into this grant because they were so good at turning out grants, but they didn't have the ability to go work in these communities and actually drop violence in them. And so their contract ended. They're doing their other contracts. They're very good at other kinds of social work, but their grant got given to someone else. So when I talk about pairing measurement and focus on outcomes, and then pairing that outcomes and the resources and the autonomy, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I'll give you one more example, and this is from Denver. We were working with Denver, and this is going to end up sounding a lot like what Chief Red was talking about, but I didn't know about his thing before I started this. We were working with Denver, and they had invested a ton. They were going to have these new units of housing. They wanted to use them for their highest utilizers, like their most serious folks who are homeless. So they made this list. They crosswalked who had been in and out of jail, who had been in and out of emergency psych, who had been in and out of the emergency room, who had been in and out of shelter for years. And they said, these are our folks who are taking the highest use of resources in our system and also causing the most community impact. They then randomized it. For all the nerds out here, that will mean you can actually tell if the thing you're seeing is causal impact. So they cut the list in half, they took half of them, and then they randomly assigned them to 2 providers. So they had 2 providers from the community step up and say, we are willing to be accountable for outcomes for people. And they assigned them people, so they couldn't pick them. They weren't allowed to choose and to say, oh, I'm sorry, we don't treat people like that. Because of course, understandably, you have this big service array with all these separated parts, and everyone's saying like, well, we only do this piece. And it's all well-intentioned, but what just so happens is like the really hard to serve people end up not getting served. They always somehow end up falling through the cracks. So they took 2 providers and they said, listen, you're gonna be compensated. There are resources here. And we have these housing units. We've got the money for the services, but we need to assign people to you. And when we assign them to you, you're responsible for them, whether you wanted them or not. And so they assigned people off the list to the providers. And then the providers had to go hustle and find these people. They had a limited time window when they had to get them, engage them, get them into housing, and get them into services. And the thing that we saw that really changed is instead of a kind of like, we'll find them when we find them, I don't know, they haven't been around, these providers had to all of a sudden change their models. One of them had to hire a street outreach team because they didn't have street outreach, they just had their clinical services. So they had to build out this whole new piece because now they were going to be soup to nuts, not just one small piece of the system. And the other provider had to like really revamp the way it was doing some things because they were really going to get measured on whether they could deliver. But what we ended up seeing is they found, and they worked really closely with the police. They gave a list of these people to the police, and they said, if you see any of these people, if you come in contact with them, call us immediately. We will come over and we will tell them, we have a bed for you today. We can get you in today. You do not have to wait. And what we saw is they were able to find almost 80% of the people on the list, which is incredible. These are really hard people to find. They got them into housing. 3 years later, so almost 80% of them were still housed. They saw a 40% drop in arrests. They saw almost a 40% drop in emergency room visits. They saw a drop in detox usage. They saw an increase in visits to scheduled medical appointments, and they saw an increase in adherence to psychotropic medications. Now, that's probably going to sound familiar because I think it's kind of similar to what you all are doing here, where you're taking a discrete list of people and you're saying, we're going to focus on do this people first. We're going to serve people, not processes, and we're going to work down to figure out what does each of these people need, and we're going to have a point of accountability. So the thing I really like about this example is they took those pieces of the car, like all the disconnected pieces where the police had been kind of in contact with people, and then they'd also been in and out of emergency medicine, and they'd also been in and out of the shelters, and they just kept falling through the cracks. And what they did is they put all those pieces together into one vehicle. They put someone in charge as a single point of accountability. They gave that person resources, and they said, you need to go get it done. And the other thing that I really like about this is when you do that, the person who's on the front lines trying to figure this out comes back to you and tells you about what needs to change about the system. They come back and they say, why are the wait lines for the inpatient slots so long? We keep calling this person, they won't take our people. And so that person who's then the single point of accountability can become the truth teller to you about what needs to change in the system, because they're in charge of getting their people into services. And so they can come back and tell you, we've got to make a faster pathway here. We've got to turn this around. All right, I'm going to talk about one more piece of homelessness so these are all things that are kind of like core to how we handle homelessness. Let's measure, let's have accountability, let's combine resources with accountability and let people be innovative while holding them accountable to actually showing outcomes. But I'm going to talk about a piece now that's like this is a little bit my pet thing. I haven't heard very many homelessness researchers talking about this. We're doing some cutting edge research right now in Detroit. We're listening to thousands of phone calls of people who call in when they're worried that they're going to lose their homes. They call into this housing hotline. And what it's let us do is it's let us look months up the pipeline. Because a lot of times the data we have is, where were you last night? Well, where someone was last night is they were also on the street. So it's hard to figure out what's causing people to come into homelessness. But we've been able to listen to thousands and thousands of calls of people who are saying, I'm worried about my housing stability, and try to figure out what happens in the months before you become homeless. And it was all the stuff we already knew about: economic shocks, medical issues, being behind on rent and having that just pile up and pile up. But the thing that we didn't know about that really jumped out of these calls was interpersonal disputes. You're living with someone and you can't get along and you're kicked out and you've been making a contribution to rent, but now you've got to go find a market rate place on your own. So now you're homeless. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because there's really cool research coming out from my colleague Raj Chetty at Harvard, who's done some of the foundational research on economic mobility. And what he's finding is that we've talked a lot about financial capital and how that is related to your economic mobility. But the thing that he's learning is social capital is also really important. Your connections to other people are part of what protects you from challenges in life. And when people drain down that social capital, they're much more vulnerable to the types of shocks that push you into emergency systems. So I wanted to say that for two reasons. One is, it's kind of a cool emerging thing in homelessness prevention. And so if you're a part of an organization that isn't working directly on homelessness, but you're strengthening relationships between people, you may be doing homelessness prevention work. Because what we're finding is the stronger those networks can be, the more people can be connected to each other, the more chance they have at riding out those waves without having to come into the emergency system. But the other reason I wanted to say is because this is also true for us as a society. We are losing the skills of living together, like both at this small scale where people can't live together and it's pushing them out into homelessness, but also at a big scale. And one thing I have really appreciated about the leadership of your state and your governor is talking more openly about trying to bring back civility into public discourse and trying to be able to work with each other and live with each other, even if we don't agree with each other. We've had your governor come out multiple times to Harvard now to talk about his platform as the NGA chair and his real push that he's making to say, like, we need to be able to get along. We need to be able to have polite conversation. And I really think about it as meaning, like, we need to be able to live together and work together. So this is something that we're seeing on the micro level for individual people, where the inability to work out those relationships pushes you into harm's way. But I also think it's true at the macro level, and I appreciate the leadership that Utah is taking and saying, we're not going to let things pull us apart and divide us. We're going to work together. Even if we don't agree with each other, we can do this together. And that's particularly important because to solve these problems that are so hard, we've got to be able to work together. So to finish, I'm going to share a song with you. My nieces and nephews came home from school and wanted to sing me a song that they were learning, I think, about the history of Utah or something like that. And I told them I would play it for all the important people that were here. So I hope you're going to be able to hear it.
People working together, Utah. What a great place to be. Blessed from heaven above. It's the land that we love. This
in order to do these things, we're going to have to be Utah working together. Thank you.
Gloria and Dr. Marbut will be singing that song right after this. Dr. Marbut, please come up. After more than 4 decades on the front lines of homeless services, Dr. Marbut is here today to share his insights, his perspectives, and both Gloria and Dr. Marbut will be staying for a guided Q&A, and then after, if you can corner them as well, they'd be happy to answer your questions. So without any further ado, Dr. Marbut.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm going to go a little quicker than we planned, just do some quick catching up here. I'm going to be taking an approach more on the federal level, sort of the federal numbers, why we're going our direction, why we're taking some different approaches. And so this comes right out of the AHAR. So this is the earliest data there's any federal level. Data is 2007. This goes to 2013. And what's interesting about this slide is there was a myth before 2013 that homelessness was skyrocketing, and that's just not true. These are the 4 types of homeless that were measured, and if you go back to 1987, there were 4 definitions beginning. So the red is transitional housing, permanent housing is the sort of maroon, emergency shelters, then transitional is the black, green is the unsheltered. And what's interesting, when you look at the unsheltered, it's actually going down pretty steadily and dramatically. And what's cool about this slide is there's a Democratic administration in here, there's a Republican administration in here. At this time, for people who were providers, and when I was running Haven for Hope, was in this time frame here, and every time you had a housing voucher, it was directly tied to treatment and recovery. Back then it was called wraparound services. And this all starts in 1996. If you back up back it up into 1996, Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton were doing the welfare reforms. And they said anytime you give out federal assistance, it needs to be tied to something that helps get you out of that need for assistance and has accountability to that. That was in 1996. And these definitions go all the way back to 1987 when Jack Kemp was the Secretary of HUD, and Ronald Reagan set up the first usage. That's the first time the federal government gets involved. So it's pretty flat. But here's what was interesting. Everybody was required to have treatment services. Back then it was called wraparound services. If you got a housing voucher, you had services tied to it. And that was how agencies were measured, is how successful your wraparound services were. Then in 2013, the Continuing Care Program, and I point out the word competition, this is the formal title of it, Notice of Funding Availability. This is where Housing First comes in, rapid rehousing, but it's the first welfare program that Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton had worked on that disconnected the requirements. It now became just vouchers. And in many ways, homeless vouchers in 2014 and forward almost become housing vouchers with no rules. In fact, most of the country, not all the country, but most of the country, the vouchers had less rules than even Section 8 at that time, even less rules than Section 8. And so the big thing 2013 NOFO said is an agency can no longer have treatment requirements. You can no longer require somebody to go to a case manager, to go to an AA meeting, to go to life skills class, or job training, or any of that. If you have a substance use or behavioral health, mental health, you're not required to go to a 12-step program. All those requirements were broken. And when you go back, the federal government was equally funding almost exactly at 1/3. 1/3 emergency services, emergency sheltering, 1/3 transitional services, and 1/3 permanent supportive services. But after all of these changes, Emergency services that were 1/3 in 2013 were less than 4.8% last year, the last 4 years of the prior administration. Transitional housing was 1/3 in terms of federal spending. It went to 1%. So it went from about 34% to 1% last year. In permanent supportive housing, think long-term housing government subsidy, that was 33% in 2013. That's now 83%. And so if you're a cynic, welfare is over doubled in this area. If you're not a cynic, is it being properly used? And so here's what happened when we did this. This is the spaghetti chart right out of the report that HUD does every year to Congress. It's called the AHAR report. And it's a spaghetti slide, and you sort of lose a lot of meaning in this. Every category of homelessness is going up except for transitional housing. But when you stack it, it's much easier to look at. And this slide has a lot going on this, and again, I want to speed it up so we have time. But overall homelessness almost is double. Every category is bigger now, except for transitional housing. And the important thing to remember is in 2013, when this policy was adopted, the President of the United States, Usage is Strategic, which is the interagency or the homeless czar, the HUD said, if we adopt this approach, it's going to end all homeless in 10 years. That's why we're going to adopt it. It's going to end all homelessness in 10 years. It was going to end chronic homeless in 5. It was going to end veteran homeless in 5. It was going to end family homeless in 8, and all homeless would end in 10 years, and it didn't work. And government subsidized housing almost tripled. So even though we're tripling the welfare, we're tripling the assistance, it didn't even end what was promised when it was done. So when we look at what HUD is trying to do, we want to bring, one thing we want to do is bring competition back. This is a competition grant. The last 4 years, the agency contracts that went out from the federal government for the last 4 years was 93% automatic renewal contracts. That meant only 7% was competed. When you don't compete, you lose transparency, you lose accountability, you lose outcomes, and you also lose innovation. So we want to bring competition back. The next thing we want to try to do is we want to really fundamentally change what the measurement is. If you go back in this slide, in 2009, the HEARTH Act, which was a congressional act, it's an acronym for the Homeless Act that was passed, it said the #1 measurement for the entire country, for continuum of cares, and for every agency is how many people do you move to self-sufficiency? Not how many people you put in a government-assisted housing. It was how many people become independent. Now, will everybody become independent? No, nobody ever thought that. I don't think you would get anybody think that. But the measurement back then was a very clear, precise measurement. It was independence. And I went to Peter Drucker University, and Peter Drucker was still alive when I was there, and he was writing a lot of books, as you know. But his last 5 or 6 books were very different than his prior 100. It was, what can nonprofits and government learn from business? Systems approach, measurement approach, a lot of what Gloria talked about in terms of accountability and numbers. And he always said, in every lecture he ever gave, every book, he always said, what gets measured gets done. What gets measured gets done. And I've added a Robertism, what gets measured gets done, and if you measure the wrong thing gets done. So if we are measuring how many people we put in assisted housing, that's not self-sufficiency. Because the goal per Congress, signed by the president in 2009, was self-sufficiency. The other is we really want to get real changes and better use of funding of whatever our federal money that we're in charge of. And we hope by example, state money, local money will go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip several things that, in order to get caught up on time. I want to talk about 5 really incredible cities doing incredible things and are really changing and moving the ball. One is San Francisco. Mayor Laurie, he's done about 35 things on homeless. He ran on homeless. That was his #1 issue. He's done like 35 things. We've spent a lot of time with his staff. His deputy, I think chief of staff is her title, is Dianne Feinstein's granddaughter, which is sort of interesting because Dianne Feinstein was one of the proponents of Housing First, and now the granddaughter's saying it didn't work. And we're out in the San Francisco, out there a couple of months ago. He has done incredible things, and I'll just give 3 examples. He's done like 30. One is they had a line item in their general fund budget, $5 million to buy alcohol for alcoholics. In the budget, gone. Put it into treatment. They had $26 million to have a safe consumption site for fentanyl that was supposed to drop the death rate. Instead, the death rate is doubled. They got rid of the safe consumption site, $26 million, put it into treatment. He's taken long-term PSH housing and has decommissioned 2 of them and made them transitional treatment centers with rules, 40-hour work week, and such. The day we were there, our events accidentally got scheduled at the same time, so he moved his. He said, I want to stomp on you, I want to coordinate. And we're like, does that mean so the protesters can come and follow us? And we didn't know. And he did the press conference that day. He's getting really attacked on his far, far left, way on his left. And he got attacked because he said, you're not bringing enough lived experience. You're not honoring the agency of lived experience. That's in essence what it. So he did a press conference. You can look all this up. This is all online. You can find it if you want to. He said, San Francisco, it's been 130 years that it's illegal to do drugs on the streets of San Francisco. But the prior 3 mayors let drugs go, open air. The DAs let open drug use go. He said, in my city, I'm going to arrest you for open drug use. Then you have the agency of choice of jail or treatment. And that's what he's put out. So everybody, there's no more open drug use. Yeah, it's unbelievable. He now has a 75% popularity rating, the highest that any mayor of San Francisco's had in like 3 decades. And he's not stopping, and you can go look. He's done all sorts of wild things. Next mayor, Philadelphia. First day in office, she comes in, she campaigned on homelessness. First day in office, she said, our problem is so big, we have to have everybody helping out. The prior 2 Philadelphia mayors said, we don't want faith community helping us because we don't want proselyte. We want a nice clean line of church and state. The faith community shouldn't help, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, this problem's too big not to have everybody help. If you're a faith group and you run a good program, we want you. If you're a secular group and have a good program, we want you. But if you have bad programs, we don't want you. So she made it her version of executive order and said, we want the faith-based back. She also had a neighborhood called Kensington. There are very few neighborhoods in the world who invented a drug, Trank. For those of you who don't know what Trank is, it's fentanyl diluted down because fentanyl kills you in first use. So they found out that if you dilute it down 30% with horse tranquilizer, you don't die as fast. Think about that. The dilution is something for a 2,000-pound animal, and you're putting 30% of that in, 70% fentanyl, and you don't die as fast. And you know it's Trank because they have the fentanyl fold, but they also have the open sores, and it's normally 4 to 6 inches, and you see to the bone. So if you ever see somebody in a fentanyl fold with open wounds, they're on trach. And she said, not in my city. And so the first police that she got in right away, she talked to the chief, and she got the chief, and they started adding people, and it wasn't doing enough. She goes up, does the first police academy graduation of her time. She gets up. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you all the families, whatever. All 75 of you are reporting tomorrow to Kensington. She sent the entire new police academy class to that neighborhood. She did that 3 times. And if you go into Kensington now, there's a police officer on every single, when I drove through it 2 weeks ago, there's a police officer on every single intersection. And they're arresting people. And they're saying, you can go to jail or you can go to treatment. Austin mayor, similar thing. Mayor Watson, he cleared out 2,300 encampments in 1 year. 2,300 encampments in 1 year. Some of those are small, but some of those, the big ones that the prior mayors were fighting with the governor over, you know, that you saw on the highway, a lot of news. Mayor Whitmire, Houston, Texas, same thing. He said, we're a city that claimed to end homeless twice, and now they have 3 times more homeless than they've ever had before, people experiencing homelessness, even though they announced twice they ended it, and he said it didn't work. He just openly says housing first is a folly. You're never going to have enough money to keep putting people on it unless you get people treatment and get out of homelessness. That's the mayor of Houston. Then finally, probably the strangest one, a few weeks ago, they actually seated me with Mayor Wilson, mayor of Portland. We sat together and did a joint presentation for 2 hours. And by the end, he goes, you and I agree about 90% of the time. And I turned to him and I said, is that worse for you or worse for me? You know, this is a guy who actively campaigned against my boss. The Philadelphia mayor actively campaigned against my boss and was Kamala's traveling, you know, she's the one that traveled with Kamala during the campaign. Austin, Texas, he campaigned against our boss. San Francisco, Mayor Lowry campaigned against our boss. So these are, and there are about 35 blue city mayors now doing this program, you know, following what we've promoted. And they're not waiting for all the lawsuits that occurred. They're not waiting for Congress to do it. But they've already made these changes. These blue city mayors, they're all liberal. They're all very active. But they all have been elected in the last 18 months. And they're not accountable to that sort of bad history. And they're also using common sense. So where we are with the federal government, we want to change what gets measured and go back to where we were. Are we doing self-sufficiency? Are we getting people out? Because measuring how many more people you add to welfare or government assistance, we'll run out of money to do that. It won't work. It's also not dignifying to that person, and it doesn't help save your city. And so the second thing we want to do is help save communities. And the third thing, the most important thing, is we really want to help people recover and get out of homelessness. Because during this entire time of the last 30 months, the death rate in the homeless community has doubled in the last 30 months. Every city that tracks death rate, when you add them up together, it's over doubling in the last 30 months. Death rate. What we're doing now is not working. It is absolutely not working here. And when then you overlay a death rate, not every city tracks death rates, so death rates aren't, we don't throw it on the board because not everybody tracks it. But you look at the death rate, is it dignifying to have double the death rate in a country when we're spending more money on homelessness than we've ever had? And so we've really lost our guiding star. So we're trying to get back to the self-sufficiency. That's our North Star, and that's what we're aiming for. All the other things are, as Gloria talks about, and we may disagree on what an outcome and an output it is, but we agree with that, the system. Output is your end thing, is how you get there. That's your management practices, you know, how many toiletries and such. And if you're a provider and you go to your website and it talks about toiletries and bed nights and meals, those are outputs or those are management tools. Outcome is how many people in your agency went through and became self-sufficient with dignity and respect and moved on to market rate housing. So how are we doing Q&A? Are we, yeah. So we bring it.
Here's what we're going to do. If you need to leave, we'll give you 60 seconds to leave. Gloria and Dr. Marbut are going to come up here. We're going to put some chairs on the right side of the stage. And feel free to come in closer. We're going to do a brief Q&A and really make the most of our great panelists.
Pardon me, sorry. Thanks, brother.
That was... Of course.
What's up, Tyler?
Hey, good to see you.
Yeah, good.
You hanging in there? I was excited to see you.
Oh, yeah, I was looking away from you. I've been taking your picture.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to show you something if you got a sec.
Absolutely.
It's just a flyer. I started a roofing company.
Okay.
That's unlike any other roofing company. And every roof we do supports.
I'd love to ask a question.
Okay. Do you have a question? I'm just compiling kind of like aggregate questions.
You doing all right, sir? Yeah, Robert.
So,
Nice to meet you.
having lived in California for many years,
Oh, yeah, I was going to give you
trying to help you up.
I was going to give you high five.
Larry Krasner as EA in Philadelphia, a big change that they did was ending cash bail and decriminalization of
Nice
minor
visiting
drug
with you.
crimes. And, you know, I suspect that kids here with a dime bag of weed would probably still get it.
I'm writing some notes here.
My name's Emily. I'm the chair of the Downtown Community Council,
Okay,
by the way.
you spoke at City Council recently.
I did about,
Okay.
yes, and I read a
Okay, that's right.
if we're going to enforce it.
There you go. There you go. Well, thank you. Go ahead and start our Q&A. We're going to start with Gloria. If we could go ahead, is it okay? Are you going to be around for a few minutes? Okay. Our panelists too are going to be around for a few. So, Gloria, this is one of the questions. The people in the room, as I look out, are a lot of our state, local, county leaders. You talked about silos.
Yeah.
What are you studying at the Harvard Kennedy School to break down those silos?
Okay, that's a great question. I mean, listen, here's how we're seeing it. We built government to be easy to administer, but not to make it easy to serve people. And so what you have to do is you have to do what we were kind of describing, which is figure out who you're trying to serve and then reverse engineer a system that will serve them well. Sometimes it means you have to pull things down and rebuild them because the systems that we have right now are all set up to be easy to get, easy to administer. You get your funding out, you stay in your lane, you look at that stuff, but that doesn't really work for the people who are getting the services. And so one of the things that we're seeing, I think governments who are doing this do really well is they pull people together the same way that you have here, and then they ask those people, what do you need? There's an example of this. I went and watched this gun violence reduction meeting in New York City where it's the 5 DAs from the 5 boroughs and the NYPD, and they're doing this thing that like everyone in New York is going to watch because they're like, this is one of the most amazing things happening in government right now. They do this standing meeting every morning. They bring the names of the people who've been arrested in the last 24 hours, who they think are the most likely to commit another shooting, and every agency is putting their information on the table so that they can get folks who need to be off the streets. So I went and watched it. I'm gonna write a little case about it. It is incredible. But what it is at its core is it's all of these agencies who have computer systems that won't talk to each other, physically delivering information to each other by reading things to each other. And they're like, yeah, we saw him. He's got 25 warrants in Maryland. Yep, we had him in probation. He beat an officer. And so on some level, it's like government working the way it should, where everyone's collaborating. And on another level, you're like, oh, I guess our computers can't talk to each other, so we have to get in the same room and talk to each other. So when government's working really well, it's working around the barriers that we create. And what people can do who want to help fix that is figure out how to make more permanent that ability to share data, collaborate, pool funding, get rid of all those fake silos that are keeping people from being able to collaborate.
Excellent. And we'll loop back to that too. That was a couple of the questions we got was about governance. Dr. Marbut, you alluded to this. You talked about fentanyl. You've done work on this. I believe you've done a film about fentanyl. What can you share about, from the federal level, is this something that only a HUD or USICH is looking at? Talk about the collaboration, and is that a priority?
I'm going to stand up so you can see here. I think we got to have an honest conversation about drug use in the United States. If you go back to 1983 with PCP, angel dust, cocaine, white powder, crack, rock, whatever form of coke, K2, spice, meth, Purdue Pharma, synthetics, now fentanyl, then tranq, and the derivatives. Every one of those drugs since 1983, United States consuming over 30% of the world consumption of each one of those drugs. We're 4% of the world's population, and we're consuming mostly 30 to 40% in that. Some of those drugs were over 50%. And so some of this is the permissiveness of the laws. Some of this is the non-enforcement. Some of it is the lack of treatment services that have been cut off. And so we in the federal government have been we've had so many interagency meetings. The real leader is the drug czar. If you ever get to see Sarah Carter talk, she's leading the way. Secretary Turner, the VA secretary, HHS, labor, ed, that we were all in the same room last month just working on this issue. And we just put out the national drug policy that just came out a couple weeks ago. And you'll see the treatment orientation. It's a combine of treatment orientation, but we got to get tough on our own streets. And everybody knows what we're doing with, crack, sort of crack cocaine, fentanyl, meth overseas with the cartels in China. That is very well understood. People get that. But we got to get back to have and a lot of people miss this. California voted 2-1 16 months ago to recriminalize all drugs in the state. I mean, a lot of people miss that, but and I don't mean weed, but all the other drugs got recriminalized. They want to bring back drug court and everything. And so citizens are starting to take control of this and such. So it has to be a combination of increased treatment, more enforcement on local streets, and then the interdiction of the incoming supply.
Thank you, Dr. Marbut. We'll come back to Gloria. You talked about folks who are feeling the economic squeeze and housing being a barrier. In all of your work, I listed all the political subdivisions that you've worked in and your team's worked in. Are there places who are building enough housing, the interim housing, the transitional housing, the supportive housing, and the market rate housing? Can you talk about what you've seen there?
Yeah, the really famous example for this right now in the country is in Texas, actually. There are Texas cities that have done such a good job building market rate housing at a scale that has allowed them, while the rest of the country is just climbing year after year, they are holding steady, or in some cases even dropping. So Austin's been an example of this, where they have put a bunch of different measures in place that has just allowed tens of thousands of units to be built, and their rents are actually dropping or holding steady while everyone else's are rising. And the more you can do that, the more you can just make a regular market rate apartment affordable, the less you need the expensive subsidized units. And so one thing we really encourage places to think about is, like, you should be doing both things. You don't want to, of course, wait and be like, don't worry, we're going to do the housing. You have to have the emergency system in place. But if you can be building enough housing that the cost of it's going down for folks, the more you can do that, the more people will be like, oh, I can afford that, and you won't need the really expensive subsidized housing. Or you can utilize it for your more high-risk folks.
It's connected.
It's connected.
Powerful stuff. Dr. Marbut, one thing that came up in the questions in our discussion, the role of faith-based communities in serving in the homelessness space. Is that something that the federal government is looking at? And what has your experience been in the past 40 years with the faith-based providers?
Let me hit the philosophical first or the historical before I go to what we're doing. When was, just real quick, I know we can't go around, when was the highest percent level of widower, orphan, physically disabled, and military trauma in America's history?
Civil War.
Post-Civil War, exactly. 1865. So for 120 years, not till 1987 does federal government have a homelessness policy. Till 1987. And there was a project, you know, a little thing here and there, but not till 1987 did major, you know, Department of Ed got involved, HUD got involved, Drug Czar got involved. And so for the first 120 years in America, it was the Salvation Army, it was the American Red Cross, which was faith then, it's become since secular, the Union Gospel Rescue Mission, City Gate Network. They provided those services that are now VA got into, Ed got into, and such. So in some ways, we're in a lot of meetings with the faith community who says, when the government intervened and started making all these rules, it made it harder for us to do what we're doing. So they're wanting us to re-level the playing field and not have restrictive rules of faith community that were more restrictive to faith than secular. And we really believe, because our problem is so acute, we need to be measuring how good you do it, not how you do it. It should be how good you're doing it. That should be our ultimate measurement. So Drug Czar's leading the way, HUD's leading the way, HHS, but we're spending a lot of time working on that. You're seeing a lot of rules already coming out about that, trying to make it easier for the faith community to play like that, to be in an even playing field, because they had so many restrictions added to them.
Thank you. And pivoting off of something you earlier said, Gloria, is healthcare. You said this intersects with the healthcare system. We have some of our Medicaid advocates in here, some folks from mental health providers. Talk to us about what is the role of the healthcare sphere in homelessness?
Oh, I mean, it's enormous, because especially for that group that we were talking about that is dealing with that disability, severe mental illness, substance use, you know, what we were saying is you might be able to offer them a housing unit, but if you don't have the supports, then they won't be able to maintain it, and their well-being is at risk. And so the ability to braid those things together and to be able to give people both somewhere safe to be and the ability to get access to treatment is really important. And I think this is one of the places where, as you were saying earlier, Tyler, where the silos really hit us, because the different Medicaid billing things make it so that when people aren't billable anymore under the particular kind of care that they're getting, they drop back into the system, and the team that used to be taking care of them gives them an exit plan and kind of sends them out. No, not always, of course. Some places are working really hard to have those exit plans be real handoffs and those type of things, but we're just still seeing a lot of places where someone comes in, they get treatment for the kind of acute thing that they have at that moment. What they actually need is something much longer term, but they get the acute thing, they get sent back out, you know, with some kind of exit plan. And look, I mean, this is really hard. It's really hard to work with these folks and get them connected. If you don't get them connected and you just release them with a list of phone numbers, you know what's going to happen next. And so figuring out how to integrate those systems more is really critical.
Those warm handoffs.
Yeah.
Really
hot
well said.
handoffs for these folks.
Yeah, hot handoffs. Dr. Marbut, you are very familiar with Utah's governance system of how we've tried to align efforts. There's the state homeless coordinator, mixed reviews on him so far. But you know, we have multiple different systems in Utah and other states. What are your recommendations on a governance side to align everything from federal dollars, state dollars, local governments? What have you seen across the country that is having success?
Anything you do to streamline the process is better, because then you have more transparency, more accountability. To your point, whoever shared that, we went different ways yesterday at different times, but whoever said having everybody at the table means nobody's in charge. You want everybody at the table, but you want somebody in charge. one person in charge, like one clear person in charge. So the more streamlining you do, the better off. And I know it's very controversial, but you're one of the few states where it could easily work is to go to one single continuum of care for the whole state. You have three, any state that has 3, 4, or 5, that'd be an easy lift to get to one single continuum of care where all the federal money is going through a single point where it's very clearly accountable and such. There's been a lot of pushback on our continuum of care model. All we've tried to do is give points back to what Secretary Cuomo did when he delivered it. You know, when he invented it, he said you have to have faith-based at the table, you have to have law enforcement at the table, you have to have all the providers, you have to have downtown business, the tourism district, the special district, the Main Street. If you look at most continuing cares in America now, it's the permanent supportive housing providers and staff. That's what most continuum cares are. And the biggest pushback we've got are not the 40-hour week, not the accountability. The thing that we've gotten the most complaints on that have come in through the website is adding elected officials to continuum cares, which were also supposed to be on that back when Governor Cuomo created that, because that's accountability. The elected officials bring accountability because if you don't do a good job, you get voted out next time.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, we are going to do one last question, but Gloria and Dr. Marbut are going to be hovering over this area. They want to hear from you. They want to hear your insights, your questions, and maybe I'm volunteering you for for a great conversation.
Here all day.
But here's the last question. Both of you have spent a lot of time here this week meeting with providers, seeing the full continuum of care from emergency shelter, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing. What stands out to you about Utah? And then for the folks who are here going the extra mile because they're hanging on to every last word, what advice, what recommendations do you have for folks specifically in Utah? And I'm going to add one more caveat, being really specific, whether it's engaging with the Kennedy School, whether it's getting engaged in a continuum of care, whatever it might be. I think folks here are hungry for those action items.
I've been coming to Utah a really long time. I used to work for the Spurs, so I used to sit with Mr. Miller, with him on the bench, and so then I went through the Olympics with you all, and then back to everybody else. I'm a Scott Howell person, so he brought me in 2012. That's when I met you, 2014 or so. The improvement is starting to occur, and I got to say, what your police chief has done here, I think he just needs another round of applause, because what you have done is I talked to the prior chiefs, and I've talked to, the captains, lieutenants, and the sergeants and such. You're doing what needed to be done for 2 or 3 decades. I don't need, I know that's probably not politically correct to say, but that's one thing that you have really improved on, and it just was out of control what was being allowed to happen. And so you've done an amazing thing. Now we got to get everything else together. You have a lot of bureaucracy that a lot of states don't have. Every time you've had a problem, you add a layer on a layer on a layer, and now you're a new layer on you, or a layer on everything else. And so if you're doing that and getting rid of the lower layers or the intermediate layers, that makes a lot of sense. But if you just add and don't get rid of anything, that's not streamlining it, that's making it a little more muddled. And so I'd move to one funding central system for all funding, city, county, local, state, federal, pass-through, direct, indirect, all goes through one system with one person in charge who has total accountability, might be on a board that has, gets the inputs from Volta area, but you have to streamline the governance dramatically.
Thank you.
I've also been coming to Utah for a long time. One of the things that struck me so much yesterday talking to your providers is that one thing I love about Utah is I think it's a place that is very, very entrepreneurial. You have the things that are happening with tech here. But I also just think that Utah in general has this incredible kind of entrepreneurial spirit of like, we can build it, we can do it here, we can figure it out. And that comes through in your provider community, in your philanthropic community, with your government folks. You're very lucky to have that. And I think that if you can capitalize on and listen to each other, you can build a new thing. The two other things I would say, one are, I agree with a lot of what Dr. Marbut just said. I think that if you talk to, a lot of times we're kind of like, the providers aren't doing stuff. Like, I mean, everyone likes to stand outside the providers and be like, it's so clearly inefficient from outside. The thing that is hard to see from the outside is that providers are often doing what they're doing because they have so many restrictions on them. Every tiny slice of funding that they have been given has come with a different set of eligibility requirements, a different set of reporting requirements. I don't know if the road home is still here, but they showed us this gorgeous data dashboard yesterday. I hope this is okay for me to say. Beautiful, tracking amazing things, but one of the things they showed us, is it okay if I say the thing about the food? Okay, they said they're required to report for every meal what percentage of the meal came from which philanthropic funding source. Now, I'm sure that that was really well-intentioned by the philanthropic folks, as they want to know where their money's going, but that means that somebody whose job was supposed to be helping people who are homeless is in their kitchen counting the percentage of the ingredients so that they can track back every meal to a specific funding source. And I'm kind of like, if you trust these people to feed homeless people, you should trust them to figure out where their food's coming from. So again, I think those are all well-intentioned reporting things where every philanthropy is like, we want to show where our money's going. We want to, like, of course they want to be accountable too, but it is accidentally turning into a system where people are spending more time doing bookkeeping than they are serving people. Not more time, you guys are doing amazing, I'm serving people. Anyway, so that's one thing I would say is, if you are thinking about pooling funding, strip out every single requirement that is not as connected to getting someone a good service. Okay, and I know that the folks on the outside really like to feel like asking for reports is helping, but asking for reports is actually not helping. You should measure, you have accountability, but streamline that stuff way down and then go let your providers cook and then hold them accountable. But don't ask them to be like, I took 4 steps and then I took 7 steps and I did it and then I put like, all right, so that's my second thing. And my third thing is, one thing I love about Utah is you guys look outside for advice, like so eager to learn, so eager to like pull in expertise. So I do just want to tell you, you have got the answers here. You do not need outside people. Like, you don't need Harvard. We're happy to support if you need, but like you have unbelievably smart and talented people in your community who are thinking about this full time, who are figuring stuff out. Just listen to each other. Like, you've got this. And those of us from outside are like happy to cheerlead, be helpful in whatever way we can. But you don't need outside people to get you over this. Like, you've got it here.
Let's give a huge round of applause to our panelists. Thanks for a great conference, for Solutions Utah for letting us all be a part of this. Our panelists will be over here hanging out. Drive safe, and let's continue the great work together.